Black lights and booze burn when I record for Watts. And every black like Troy Davis who never had a fair shot. All black everything, everything black. Culture over everything, y'all, we taking it back. Black.
I'm watching this clip. And the first thing, and first of all, it's through Urban Organic that I was first introduced to you. This is going back a few years. We have a common colleague, David Leonard, who had been big up in you. Mm-hmm. And I'm watching this clip now, and it's something almost Afro-futuristic about it, in the sense that you're watching this clip, and it's like, we can live like that. Right, everything from the growing of the food to the creating of community and family within the context of that. And it's interesting because we're at this moment now where everybody knows about Black Lives Matter, right? And of course, everything's about the end game, right? About police brutality and all those kind of realities. Some of us are dying before we get to that end game. So how important has it been for you to be able to talk about, what we might call, Black food matters, in terms of talking about the ways that we can begin to take better care of ourselves even before we have to deal with these kind of social political realities?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because, it's important for me to trace this thread throughout the 20th century of activists, Black activists, activists of African descent and Africans who have been focusing on food issues, because what I'm often fighting against, and a lot of activists of African descent working around food issues are fighting against, is this reality in which many of the stories that are highlighted in the media, in the New York Times or the Food and Wines or wherever, and just to be like fully transparent, I recognize I benefit from that, because I'm often like the dude. Like, we need a Black dude in this article, can you be in? But it's often young, well-educated, white, pretty people. And it's leaving out.
And they get TV shows and,
that's a
branding deals.
Yeah.
Right.
That's a whole other thing. But, it's just like, what about like all these Black elders? What about the, immigrants from Asia? What about the farm worker, the Latino migrant farm workers who are pretty much propping up our food system and ensuring that we can have such a diverse and abundant food supply? And so, always fighting against that. And then there's this issue of our people often constructing or imagining healthful food or locally grown food as white. When I started to be healthy, we would have young people who would actually be like, oh, that's white people's food, all that healthy stuff. And I understand why they might even like imagine it that way. But for me, when I think about the people who inspired me as a young person, I think about folks like Dick Gregory, who's, been a food activist for decades. I think about, when I had my period when I was just everything about Nation of Islam. Because, all Black men got to go through a period where you're like, I'm the Nation.
Absolutely.
Elijah Muhammad. After you read the autobiography of Malcolm X.
Eat to live.
So, Elijah Muhammad's How to Eat to Live.
Yeah.
Hip-hop artists like KRS-One. I mean, there's like so many. I mean, we could think about like Seventh-day Adventist. Like some of my first contacts.
Which I was raised.
Really?
Right. I went to Seventh-day Adventist grade school, grades 1 through 8.
My first contact, when I first discovered this idea of vegetarianism, it was through African American Seventh-day Adventists.
Vegetarian food. Yeah.
Yep. Rastafarians, Ital diet.
Yeah.
And so I just think it's something that people of African descent have to reclaim and own as ours. And we can, I don't even want to go back. We could talk about like Western Central Africa and the Caribbean and like rural South. But just like the 20th century talking about activists who've been like, we need to focus on our health. That's a part of being free. And so I really see myself kind of like standing on the shoulders of those folks.
Real talk though. You from Memphis. You go into the Baptist or AME church in the American South.
Kojic, Church of God in Christ.
Right. You go to one and you're talking about sustainable organic foods. And folks wondering when the collard greens with the fat back, the smoked turkey, right? The fried chicken and all of that is coming on the table. Folks aren't trying to hear about chard. Right, or bok choy, broccoli rab, which is kind of like my favorite at the moment, right? Folks aren't trying to hear about those things. How do you get people to take this serious, particularly as it relates to not only just their spiritual health, but obviously their physical health also.
Well, once again,
And again, think about that in the context of the kind of business that black churches do at the end of life,
yeah, yeah.
right? And stuff that, in some ways might be stuff that could be dealt with 30 years earlier before
Right.
the minister has to be making all these trips to the senior home
Hmm.
or the hospital, when folks are literally at the end of their lives.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. We're good at we do the black church. We having the health fair where you can get your blood taken, you can get your sugar taken or whatever, and it's like we know we're ill.
Right,
What can we
right,
do to
right,
prevent
right, right.
that? Once again, for me, it's about helping people remember because when I think about growing up in Memphis, in my church going paternal grandfather's backyard, he was growing collards,
Yeah.
kale,
Yeah.
dandelions, but like all the foods. And this is
And
where
folks are like, you can eat dandelions?
right. I mean, they're wild, but this is where we got to get past this whole thing. So, this one of the issues is that it's not just the wider culture that we have to educate or re-educate about our complex cultural foods. We need to re-educate our own people about that because people like to keep. People talk about black food, and when they say soul food, I think for a lot of people that's synonymous with like, oh yeah, that's like African American cuisine, right? And what I found is people reduce it to one of two things. One, the antebellum survival foods, right? The food that many enslaved Africans had to rely upon in the more paternalistic part of the South, the Black Belt, where every need of enslaved Africans was provided by plantation owners, shelter, clothes, food. But one, that doesn't take into consideration that, institutional slavery wasn't a monolith. In the coastal Carolinas or the Louisiana or the Caribbean, you might have a day off. You might have your own plot of land where you could grow food for yourself and your family, not just for the plantation. And so just to reduce it to like, oh, because a lot of black folks be like, I ain't eating that, that black food, that's slave food. And it's like, well, no, that's part of it. But the other thing is people reduce it to the comfort foods of the cuisine, the deep fried fatty meats, the sugary desserts, as if all black folks eating like red velvet cake for breakfast and fried chicken and macaroni for
Well, we
lunch
got
every
red
day.
velvet pancakes now.
See, I haven't tried those, but I am interested. But that's a part of it too. But I really want people to understand that when you think about rural country folk, simple eating, it was the type of food that any Western trained allopathic physician or dietitian or nutritionist would say we all should be eating is the type of food that our ancestors were eating. We're talking about collards, kale, turnips, mustard, sugar snap peas, pole beans, black eyed peas. These are healthful foods.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And here's the thing. We could have conversations about the ethics and the environmental issues around eating a plant-based diet or vegan diet, but it's funny to me how the food that was so vilified, our food, chitlins, fatback, whatever. I go to restaurants in San Francisco now, and you paying like $30 for what are they called, tripe or
Right.
like
or trotters, right?
Yeah.
And any of y'all know what a trotter is? It's pig feet.
Yes.
Right? Give it a new name. You paying $35 for a plate of trotters, right, instead of pig feet.
I'm gonna charge you $50 for a plate of bone marrow. You know what I mean? I'm like, okay. So I just think it's really about remembering who we are and remembering what were the foods that our ancestors were eating 3 generations ago, and how before we saw these exponential rise in preventable diet-related illnesses. We don't need to be focusing on black food. We need to focus on the industrialization of our food system and how we just flooded with processed, packaged, fast, high in fat, high in salt, high in sugar foods that are killing everybody.
Talk a little bit about some of the platforms you use. There's a bunch of America that was introduced to you through Byron Hurt's film, looking at soul food. And that kind of work is critically important, right? Because where we often think about health foods in terms of the whole fooding, right, of that portion of the industry, right? And, forget about trying to afford going to Whole Foods. Right? If you're black and brown and you've been to Whole Foods, you often know that you have this experience of folks looking at you like, why are you in Whole Foods, right? So that's a whole kind of reality. But when you think about things like urban organic or the work that Byron did with his film about soul food and these other kind of smaller kind of media platforms, how important has it been to develop those and cultivate those to be able to reach a wider audience?
That's a great question. one of the things I had to get over was this very narrow way in which I initially imagined activism, right?
Because you wanted to be on the Food Network.
No, I ain't never want to be on that. Never did, never will. But no offense if they want to give me some cash or something. But no, you know, I started off as a grassroots activist around these issues. A lot of people know me as an author, or you know, even like a TV personality, depending on the context. But I started off working in communities, and a lot of, you know, I imagine that true activism is like being on the ground with the people, being in the streets protesting, and like that type of far left, on the ground grassroots activism is vitally important, right? But then I had to like reimagine different ways in which we need to be, you know, active around these issues and understand like all the forces at play. I talked about that earlier with the stuff around like the bombardment with media images and you know, just thinking about how systemic these issues are and how we need all types of people playing roles. People who are doing media work, you know, physicians, people who are grassroots activists, people who are like farmers. And so I realized that I could continue doing the grassroots activism and have like an impact in New York City and the region. But if I started to write books, then I could have a national impact. And then when I could be like on television, I went on Martha Stewart with my mentor, Alice Waters, and I'm sure I'm the only person who's been on Martha Stewart talking about food justice, talking about issues that disproportionately affect Black and brown, working class and working poor people. And so I just really had to be comfortable and get over it, you know, because I did feel this sense of guilt, like, oh man, like I'm getting book deals, I'm getting contracts, you know, I'm on television, hobnobbing with these famous people. Is that wrong? And it's just like, well, no, because I'm committed to the work and that's a role that I can play. And so, you know, I've, you know, been on, so I had the show on PBS, The Endless Feast.
Right.
And so we traveled around the country meeting with all these local producers and small farmers and people who were like in the good food movement just to hear those stories. And that's when I would hear things like, I'm not gonna say any names, but some of these corporate owned health food stores that a lot of people go to and spend their whole check. And how, you know, these small farmers like, you know, these people buy my tomatoes for $1 and they sell them for $5 and I just feel so exploited, but I feel locked into this relationship. And so just being able to like tell stories of those people, being able to have this web series and really illuminate many of these grassroots efforts and things that, you know, people just like, how are you gonna grow city in a concrete jungle? You know, and be like, no, you can do that. And I continue to see the way in which that inspires people who may not live on the coast, who may not be in these places where you get to see this on an everyday basis, and then helping them to figure out just how they could take those best practices and then modify it to make sense where they live.
You know, the clip made me think about some of the seasonal rhythms of food, when it's grown, when it's ripe, and what have you. And we've gotten accustomed to wanting to eat what we want to eat when we want to eat it. You know, so this is North Carolina, right? You know, the strawberry season is about to come. I'm probably not supposed to be eating strawberries in December.
Right.
Right, because I know those strawberries are not coming from North Carolina. Hopefully they're coming from California. Hell, they might be coming from someplace like Peru.
Right.
How do we get people more attentive, right, to the seasonal notion, right? You go to high-end restaurants and they're talking about winter vegetables and summer vegetables and, you know, most folks are eating green beans all the time.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that.
You know, I always say anything you could do to grow your own food is like contributing to the healing of the earth and helping us reconnect with the natural rhythms of the earth. And I understand the limitations some people have, but you can grow fresh herbs in your windowsill. You can grow tomatoes on a pot on your porch or your fire escape. And I think that does help people understand that it's a time and place for everything. You know, we do have an abundant food supply where you can get tomatoes in the winter and you can get whatever whenever. But I just think that, you know, for me, I like to start with I like to appeal to people's self-interest. And I don't care personally, I live and breathe this work, and I don't care how sustainable, how ethical, how environmentally sound. If the food ain't banging, I don't want it.
Right.
And I'm just like, look, if you eat food that's grown locally and that's in season, it's going to be so much more flavorful and satisfying and delicious than if you're getting tomatoes in the dead of winter that have been shipped from Mexico, and by the time you get them, they taste like cardboard, paper. You know what I mean? And so just that, I'm just like, look, just like connect with real food that's grown locally and grown in season so you can enjoy the fruits of the earth the way that they're meant to be enjoyed.
Your latest book, Afro-Vegan, Farm Fresh African, Caribbean, and Southern Flavors Remixed. One of the things I love about the book is that for every recipe, there is a soundtrack, there is a song, and for half of the recipes, there's also a book. Talk about how the cooking and the food process for you is intermingled with aspects of music and knowledge, as it's represented throughout, the book.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I'm always trying to do is just like drop jewels and educate people on multiple levels. And that's where, you might see a documentary film. I can't even think of the name of the film. It was about the economic globalization and its impact on the banana industry in Jamaica. Y'all know the name of that film? Anybody remember that? Okay. Anyway, that's a little too niche. But my point is, I could have like a recipe for plantains, and instead of me like going, having this long essay in which I'm trying to explicate all these issues, I'll just drop that and be like, go check out Life and Debt. Life and Debt is the name of the documentary. So just like, giving people that type of just resources to really help them dig deeper into these issues. So a lot of them will be directly related to health, food, and farming issues. And then, but then it's just like, I don't know, I like to tell stories. And so I'm clear that 20 years from now, there's gonna be some grad student high off mushrooms and they're gonna like crack the code of Vegan Soul Kitchen. Cause I spent like 3 months just focusing on the soundtracks. And I was like, this soundtrack is gonna tell a whole other, this is narrative that it's gonna tell. And one day somebody's gonna get it, but they're gonna be in grad school. And so, I just like music, and sometimes music might inspire the dish. And so my wife hates this, but literally I'll be in there in my zone and I'll be like playing like, I don't know, Sketches of Spain on repeat for like 8 hours while I'm testing recipes and cooking. And because it's just something about like Miles is playing that's inspiring me to like
be creative,
create in a certain way. And so I want to share that with you. And I come from a musical family. So my uncle, Don Bryant, was the head songwriter for High Records in Memphis. And my aunt is this singer, Ann Peebles. She had a popular song.
Oh, get out of here.
I can't stand the rain. Yeah.
Right.
So growing up.
Y'all know her from
Y'all know
Missy
about
Elliott.
that? I need to look her up. But, growing up, food and gatherings with family, like music was always present. So it's like we're cooking, but then Ann was singing, my Uncle Don was playing the piano, my mom and her siblings were like harmonizing. We have talent shows. So I as much as possible, I try to like, this idea, like with our industrialized food system, it's like food is this commodity over here, and art and culture and community and all the things that have traditionally been connected are way over here. So I try to like bridge that gap as much as possible in text.
You have young children. I think you said 5 and 2.
5 and 2.
So you in it.
If for no other reason to buy this book, you should get it. My little daughter. You gotta look at it now.
Talking a little bit about training the palates of young folks. Like I have a 13-year-old daughter. We gave her broccoli when she was about 3 months old. She ain't stopped eating broccoli since, right? So simply, she developed a taste for it, right? Had we waited and she consumed a bunch of other stuff before then, she might not like broccoli, right? So talk a little bit about, particularly within this, sustainable eco-culture, how important it is to train young palates to be able, first of all, to be able to recognize a diversity of taste, right? Not just the sweet ones, right?
Well, I don't know if you guys saw the film Super Size Me. Morgan Spurlock, documentary filmmaker, decided to eat only McDonald's for like a month and almost died. And so, in the film, they talked a little bit about the way in which a lot of these processed and packaged foods are engineered in laboratories to be titillating and to be addictive, and they engineer all the flavors and the scents and everything. And I think that what happens with a lot of people when they are primarily eating that food, it skews your palate. You know, it's like the tastes are so extreme, the salties, the sweets, you know, and it's like when you eat real food, you can't even taste it anymore. Like people can appreciate the taste of like the subtleties of like real food. And, you know, just on a personal note with our family, I was very clear, my wife and I are very clear that we wanted to like make sure that our girls fell in love with real food and vegetables, right? So not only did we not let them eat like processed packaged food I think for our oldest daughter, my wife, she wasn't feeling this, but I was like, no, we're gonna do this. It's an experiment. And I'm not like some autocrat in the house, but she didn't have fruits. She didn't have a lot of fruits. I mean, occasionally, but I was like, I want her to like really understand the diversity and complexity of vegetables, because it's easy to like
finding
fruits.
sweetness actually in some vegetables as
Exactly.
Right.
And so then, I mean, maybe she was like, you know, 18 months or something. Then she started to like slowly build the fruits in, and now she's in love with this. She's in love with everything, but she's also going through this phase over the past like 2 months where she's kind of like not liking some vegetables and things that she used to like when she was younger. She's about to be 5. She's not into it. And my whole thing is, all we need to do is build a strong foundation for her.
Yeah.
She strays off, she'll come back to it, you know? And I expect her to just like experiment and do her thing, but I know that that effort we put in initially is gonna always be what she, you know, kind of like, I don't know, recalibrate and get back to that or whatever.
You traveling around, the wife isn't with you, your kids aren't with you, none of your people are with you. You roll up in a grocery store, gas station, you just need to get that little snack that you ain't supposed to be getting. What's that little snack for you?
Okay, so some people might be like, oh man, that ain't even decadent, but Red Hot Blue Chips. Y'all know what Red Hot Blue Chips are? Those Red Hot Blue Chips, I can't stop eating them once I get them. I just cannot, like, if I open the bag is gonna be done right then and there. And so, you know, one of the things I always tell people is the reason that you wanna have a disciplined diet most of the time is that when it's time to indulge and have fun, you can do it guilt-free.
Right.
You know what I mean? I don't think, you know, I forget the name of this term, but it's actually a medical term now for Americans, first world privileged Americans, of course, who are so obsessed with eating healthfully that it's actually unhealthy. And so, you know, I'm like, look, well, a buddy of mine, so Saul Williams, he did this event in Oakland, and he was talking about just, you know, his relationship with food and stuff. And I just thought it was hilarious because he said that traveling the globe, he's discovered that there's a fine line between being a vegan and being an asshole. And so I think about that just in relation to, like, you know, things like, you know, I don't want to eat a lot of white flour or white sugar. And I'm like, look, I'm eating healthily most of the time. So if I go over to my grandmother's house, 90 years old, and if she give me a piece of cake with some white sugar in it, I'm gonna eat it. Like,
Because she's gonna be offended if you don't.
Right, you know? And so I just tell people, this, you know, not too much, not too little.
So you're not traveling to people's houses with like an arugula salad, you know, when you go.
Nah, see, I don't get down like that. But then again, I got, you know, like my buddy Kabui, who lives here in Durham, and I'm staying with him, and his brother be like feeding me just like, he grow food like, and he got like a vertical garden in the house. He just go by the TV and like, let me get you some arugula. So that does help.
Thank you, Bryant, for spending some time with us this evening. Thank you, folks, for coming out.
Black lights and booze burn when I record for Watts, and every black like Troy Davis who never had